You shouldn't fall in love with someone you don't understand, Emily Carter once said, but she didn't listen to her own words the night everything changed. Because at 11:42 p.m., standing under a flickering streetlight outside a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and cheap grease, she met a man who didn't belong in her world, not in her $9.50 an hour life, not in a place where tips barely covered rent and every shift felt like survival. And yet there he was, sitting alone in the rain like he had nowhere else to go, his dark coat untouched by the storm, his posture too still, too composed, like the chaos of the city simply didn't reach him. And when Emily stepped closer, clutching the last takeout bag from her shift, she hesitated for exactly 2 seconds before speaking, "Hey, you okay?" Because that was who she was, someone who helped even when she had nothing left to give. And he lifted his gaze slowly, and that was the first moment something felt off. His eyes weren't just light. They were cold, like winter pressed into glass, like something that had seen too much time pass. And Emily's breath caught without her understanding why. But she forced a smile anyway, because awkward silence was worse than strange energy, and she held out the bag. "It's just leftovers, but it's still warm." And for a second, he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe the way normal people did. And then he took it, fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment, and the cold that shot through her skin wasn't normal. It wasn't just cold hands in the rain. It was deeper, sharper, like touching something not meant to be touched, and she pulled back instinctively, her heart skipping once, then twice. But he spoke before she could step away, his voice low, controlled, almost careful. "Why would you give this to me?" And Emily shrugged, shifting her weight, trying to ignore the strange tension building in the air. "Because you look like you need it." And something changed in his expression, subtle but real, like a crack in something perfectly still, like a memory trying to surface. And he looked at the bag, then back at her, studying her in a way that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years, not like a waitress, not like someone struggling, but like something important. And that should have scared her more than it did. But instead, she stayed, standing there in the rain, talking to a stranger whose name she didn't know, whose presence made the world feel quieter, heavier, different. And minutes passed, then more, until she realized she wasn't cold anymore, even though the rain hadn't stopped. And when she laughed at something small he said, something dry and unexpected, she forgot completely that something about him wasn't right. Until a car slowed at the end of the street, black, sleek, expensive in a way that didn't belong in this neighborhood. And the moment it did, the man's posture shifted, just slightly, but enough, like something ancient waking beneath the surface. And Emily noticed, because suddenly the air felt tight, like the world was holding its breath. And the man looked past her, eyes narrowing just enough to reveal something dangerous beneath that calm exterior. And when he turned back to her, his voice was softer now, almost warning. "You shouldn't be here." And Emily frowned, confused. "I work here." But he shook his head once, slow, deliberate, like she had missed the point entirely. And that was when the car doors opened, silently, and figures stepped out, moving too smoothly, too precisely, their presence wrong in a way Emily couldn't explain. And instinct whispered something she didn't want to hear, something that made her pulse spike and her chest tighten. And she looked back at the man, really looked this time, at the stillness, the cold, the way the shadows seemed to lean toward him instead of away. And for the first time, Emily Carter wondered if kindness had just led her somewhere she couldn't walk away from. Because the man she had just helped wasn't lost, wasn't helpless, and definitely wasn't human. And as the figures approached, stopping just feet away before lowering their heads in silent acknowledgement, the man beside her exhaled slowly, like someone stepping back into a role he could never escape. And when he spoke again, his voice wasn't quiet anymore. It was something else entirely, something powerful, something absolute. "Leave," he said, not to her, but to them. And none of them argued, not a single one. Because whoever he was, whatever he wasn't just part of their world. He was the one they obeyed. Emily did not move. When the last of them stepped back, their heads still lowered, their eyes never daring to meet his. And the silence that followed was not normal silence. It was heavy, deliberate, like the air itself understood that something powerful had just spoken. And her heart was still racing because none of it made sense, not the way they obeyed him, Not the way he stood there like he belonged above all of them. And definitely not the way he turned back to her, as if nothing had changed, as if he was still just the quiet man sitting in the rain. "You should go home," he said, and his voice was calmer now. But there was something underneath it, something controlled, like he was holding back a truth she was not ready to hear. And Emily let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding, shaking her head slowly. No. Because fear was there, sharp and real. But so was something else, something stronger. Curiosity mixed with the stubborn kindness that had always gotten her into trouble. And she crossed her arms slightly, trying to steady herself. "You do not get to act like this is normal, and then just tell me to leave." And for the first time, something like frustration flickered across his face, quick but undeniable, like a crack in something ancient and unbreakable, and the figures behind him shifted almost imperceptibly, as if reacting to that change, and Emily noticed. Because everything about this moment felt amplified, every breath, every movement, every second, stretching longer than it should. And he took one step closer, not threatening, not aggressive, but intentional, and she felt it again, that cold, not just on her skin but deeper, like standing too close to something that did not belong in her world. "Emily," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice made her chest tighten, because she had never told him her name. Not once, not tonight, not ever. And her eyes widened before she could stop herself. "How do you know that?" she asked, and now her voice was not steady anymore. Now it carried something fragile, something close to breaking, and he paused, just for a fraction of a second, like he had made a mistake he could not take back. And that was when everything shifted again, because now it was not just strange. Now it was real, and whatever this was, whatever he was, it was already deeper than she had allowed herself to believe. "You should not have helped me," he said quietly, and this time there was something else in his tone, something almost like regret, and Emily let out a small, breathless laugh that did not sound like her at all. "That is not an answer," she said, and she stepped closer before she could stop herself, closing the distance he had created, because if she was already standing in the middle of something she did not understand, she was not going to back away now, not when every instinct was telling her that walking away would not change anything. And he watched her carefully, his gaze sharper now, more focused, like he was measuring something, calculating something, and the world around them seemed to fade again, the street, the diner, even the rain, all of it becoming background noise to the tension building between them. And then he spoke again, slower this time, deliberate, "Because now they know you." And Emily frowned, confusion cutting through the fear. "Who?" she asked, but before he could answer, one of the figures behind him moved slightly forward, not enough to interrupt, but enough to remind her they were still there, still watching, still waiting. And she realized something then, something that made her stomach drop. They were not here for him. They were here because of her, because she had spoken to him, because she had helped him, because she had stepped into something she was never supposed to be part of. And the realization hit all at once, fast and sharp, and she looked at him again, really looked this time, at the way he stood, at the way they responded to him, at the way the night itself seemed to bend around his presence. And the question came out before she could stop it. "What are you?" And the silence that followed was longer this time, heavier, and when he answered, his voice was no longer soft, no longer careful. It was something deeper, something older, someone you should have never met. And Emily felt it then, not just fear, not just confusion, but the unmistakable sense that her life, the simple, struggling, predictable life she had been living just hours ago, was already gone, replaced by something vast and dangerous and impossible to escape. And as the figures behind him straightened slightly, no longer retreating, no longer distant, she realized the truth she had been avoiding. Helping him was not the mistake, staying was. And now it was too late to choose differently. The rain did not stop, but Emily barely felt it anymore, because everything inside her had gone still, like her body understood before her mind did that there was no going back. And she stood there staring at him, at the man who should have been impossible, at the man who somehow knew her name. And her voice came out quieter this time, not weak, but careful. "Then why are you still here?" Because if he truly believed she should never have met him, then he could have disappeared, could have left her standing alone in the rain with nothing but confusion, but he had not, and that meant something. even if she did not understand what. And his eyes held hers for a long moment. That strange, ancient stillness. Returning, like he was weighing something far beyond this moment. Beyond her. Beyond everything she thought mattered. And when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost restrained. Because you stayed. And that answer settled into her chest in a way that made her breath catch. Because it was simple. Too simple. And yet it carried something heavier than anything else he had said. And behind him, the figures shifted again. Less patient now, less distant, their presence pressing closer. Without actually moving, like shadows stretching longer as the night deepened, and Emily felt it. That invisible line closing in. An instinct told her she should leave, that she should turn around and walk away before whatever this was became something she could not escape. But her feet did not move, and she hated that part of herself, the part that always stayed, always helped, always believed there was something worth understanding even when everything else said to run. Who are they, she asked, her voice steadier now, because fear had a way of sharpening her instead of breaking her, and his gaze flickered briefly toward them before returning to her. And for the first time, there was something almost human in his expression, something close to hesitation. They serve me, he said, and the simplicity of it made it worse, not better, because people did not just serve someone like that. Not without question, not without fear. And Emily shook her head slightly, her thoughts racing. That is not normal, she said, and his lips almost curved, not quite a smile, but something close, something that did not reach his eyes. No, he agreed. It is not. And that quiet acknowledgement sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the rain, because it confirmed what she had been trying not to believe, that this was real, all of it, and she was standing in the middle of it. And before she could say anything else, one of the figures finally stepped forward, stopping just behind him, their voice low, controlled, but unmistakably tense. My lord, this is not a place for her. And Emily's breath caught at the word, my lord, because it sounded wrong coming from someone else's mouth. It sounded too formal, too absolute, too real, and she looked back at him sharply, waiting, needing him to deny it, to say it meant nothing, to say it was just a title, just a misunderstanding. But he did not, and that silence was louder than anything else. And something inside her shifted, something final, because now she understood, not everything, but enough to know that the man she had given food to, the man she had stood in the rain talking to, was not just different, he was powerful in a way she could not even begin to measure. And the realization made the world feel smaller, tighter, like the edges of her life were already closing in, and he exhaled slowly, as if accepting something he had been trying to avoid. And when he spoke again, it was not to her, it was to them. Return to the car, he said, and this time there was no softness in his voice, no hesitation, just quiet authority that left no room for argument. And they obeyed immediately, stepping back, retreating without a word, without a glance, until they were gone, leaving the street empty again, leaving just the two of them standing there in the rain. And Emily's heart was still racing, but now it felt different, not just fear, not just confusion, but something deeper, something dangerous, because she realized that even after everything she had just seen, she had not stepped away, and that was the most terrifying part of all. And when she looked at him again, her voice was almost a whisper. You said I should not have met you. And she took a slow breath, steadying herself. So tell me why it feels like you did not want me to leave. And this time, when he looked at her, there was no distance in his eyes, no cold calculation, just something raw and unguarded for a fraction of a second, something that made the night feel even quieter, even heavier. And when he answered, his voice was barely above the sound of the rain. Because now that you are here, he said, everything changes. And Emily did not know what that meant. Not yet. But she felt it, deep and undeniable, like the first step into a world that would never let her go. Emily did not realize she had stopped breathing until the silence stretched too long, until the rain became the only sound again, steady against the pavement, against the metal awning behind her, against the space between them that felt smaller than it should have been. And she swallowed slowly, trying to anchor herself back into something normal, something familiar. But nothing about this felt normal anymore. Not the man in front of her, not the way the night seemed to bend around him, not the way her chest tightened every time he looked at her like he was seeing more than he should, and she shook her head slightly, almost to herself. "You keep saying things like that," she said, her voice quieter now, but still holding onto that edge of stubborn clarity, like my life just changed, and she let out a small breath, glancing past him to where the car had been, now gone, like none of it had ever happened, like she could almost convince herself it had not been real, except it was, and she knew it. "But I am still the same person," she added, and when she looked back at him, she expected him to agree, to dismiss it, to give her something simple to hold on to. But he did not, and that was the problem, because he never gave her simple answers, and his gaze softened just slightly, not enough to be comforting, but enough to feel intentional. "No," he said, and the single word landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. "You are not." And Emily felt that again, that shift inside her, like the ground beneath her was no longer steady, and she crossed her arms tighter, more for herself than anything else. "That is not fair," she said, because it was not. None of this was. She had helped someone. That was all. She had done what she always did, what she believed in, and somehow that had pulled her into something she did not understand, something she did not choose. And yet here she was, standing in the middle of it. And he watched her carefully, like he understood more than he was saying, like he knew exactly how far this had already gone. And he took another step closer, slow, measured, giving her time to step back if she wanted to. But she did not. And that was the part that made his expression shift again, something unreadable flickering beneath the surface. "You were seen," he said, and Emily frowned, the words not landing the way he intended. "I have been seen my whole life," she replied, almost defensively. "I work in a diner. People see me every day." And for a brief second, something almost like amusement touched his face, but it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by something far more serious. "Not like this," he said, and the weight of that difference settled into her chest, because she knew he was right. She could feel it, even if she could not explain it, and she looked down at her hands for a moment, at the faint chill still lingering from where he had touched her earlier, and she realized something else then, something quieter but just as important. She had not walked away, not when she should have, not when everything told her to, and that meant this was not just happening to her. She was choosing it, even now, even standing here with more questions than answers. And when she looked back up at him, her voice was steadier, more certain. "Then explain it to me," she said, because if her life had truly changed, if something had already shifted beyond repair, she deserved to understand why. And for a moment, he did not answer, not because he could not, but because he was deciding whether he should, and that hesitation said more than anything else could have, because it meant the truth was not simple. It meant the truth was dangerous. And Emily felt it before he even spoke, that quiet tension building again, the same one that had filled the street when those figures were still there, like the world itself was listening, waiting. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate, each word chosen with care. "There are rules," he said, "about who is allowed to know what I am." And Emily's pulse quickened slightly, because that was not denial, that was confirmation, and she held his gaze, refusing to look away now. "And I broke them," he continued, and something in the way he said it made her breath catch, not fear this time, but something else, something heavier, because he did not sound angry, he did not sound careless, he sounded certain, like he had made that choice knowingly. And that changed everything, because it meant this was not an accident, not entirely. And Emily felt the weight of that realization settle deeper. "Why?" she asked, the word barely above a whisper now. And this time, when he looked at her, there was no distance left, no cold, no barrier, just something raw and undeniable for a brief, fragile moment. "Because you looked at me," he said, "like I was just a man." And Emily's heart skipped, because that was exactly what she had done, what she always did. And suddenly that simple, ordinary act did not feel ordinary at all. It felt like the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could control. And as the rain continued to fall around them, steady and unchanging, Emily Carter realized that whatever this was, whatever he was, she was already too far inside it to pretend she could walk away. And the most dangerous part was not the world he belonged to. It was the way she was starting to understand it, starting to accept it, starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, she had been meant to step into it all along. Emily did not look away when he said it, when he admitted that he had broken something for her, something that clearly mattered more than she could understand. And for a moment the world felt impossibly quiet, like the rain had slowed just enough for her to hear her own heartbeat, steady but heavier now, because this was no longer just strange, it was personal, and that made it more dangerous than anything else. And she took a slow breath, her voice softer this time but more certain. "You do not even know me," she said, because that was the truth, the simple, undeniable truth that should have made all of this impossible. And yet it was happening anyway, and his gaze did not waver, not even slightly. "I know enough," he replied. And something in the way he said it made her chest tighten again, not fear this time, but something closer to being understood in a way she had not expected. And that should have been comforting, but it was not. Not here, not like this. And she shook her head slightly, trying to hold on to something solid, something real. "You know that I gave you food," she said. "That is not enough to change whatever this is." And she gestured faintly between them, the space that felt anything but empty. And for the first time, he looked almost human in his response, not because he smiled, but because something in his expression softened into something quieter, something reflective. "It is not the food," he said, and Emily felt that again, that shift, like every answer only led to something deeper, something she was not prepared for, and she let out a breath that turned into a small, disbelieving laugh. "Then what is it?" she asked, because she needed to hear it, needed to understand what could possibly make someone like him, someone clearly powerful, clearly untouchable, step outside whatever rules he lived by. And he did not answer right away, not because he could not, but because he was choosing how much to reveal, and that hesitation made her pulse quicken, because it meant there was more, much more. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, almost careful. "You saw me without fear," he said, and Emily blinked, the answer not landing the way she expected. "That is not true," she said immediately, because she was afraid now, very afraid, but he shook his head once, slow, deliberate. "Not at first," he corrected, and the words settled into her, because he was right. She had not been afraid when she first approached him. She had just seen someone alone, someone who might need help, and she had acted without thinking, without questioning, without considering what he might be. And now that simple moment felt different, heavier, like it had meant more than she realized. And she looked down briefly, replaying it in her mind. The rain, the silence, the way he had looked at her like she was something unexpected. And when she looked back up, her voice was quieter, more thoughtful. "That still does not explain why it matters," she said, and his gaze held hers, steady, unwavering. And this time there was no distance left at all, just something direct and undeniable. "Because no one does that," he said, and the simplicity of it made it more powerful, not less, because it meant that whatever world he came from, whatever life he lived, it was one where people did not act without fear, did not approach without hesitation, did not see him as anything less than what he truly was. And Emily felt that realization settle deep inside her, because it meant that in that one moment, without knowing it, she had done something rare, something significant, and that was why everything had changed. And the weight of that truth made her chest tighten again, because it meant this was not random, it was not chance, it was something that had already set events in motion. And she glanced around the empty street, the diner lights still glowing behind her, the city still moving somewhere beyond this moment. And for the first time, it all felt distant, like it belonged to a version of her that was already fading. And she looked back at him, her voice steadier now. "So what happens now?" she asked, because that was the question that mattered, not how this started, but where it was going. And he was quiet for a moment, just long enough to make her wonder if he would answer at all. And when he did, his voice carried that same quiet certainty she was beginning to recognize. "Now they will watch you," he said, and Emily's breath caught, not sharply, but enough to feel the shift, because she had already sensed it, already felt that invisible pressure closing in, and hearing it confirmed made it real in a way she could not ignore. And she crossed her arms slightly, not in defense, but in grounding, trying to keep herself steady as everything continued to unfold. "For how long?" she asked, and His answer came without hesitation this time. Simple, direct, and far more unsettling than anything else he had said. Until I decide what you become. And the words settled between them, quiet but absolute. And Emily realized in that moment that whatever this was, whatever she had stepped into, it was not just changing her life, it was rewriting it entirely. And the most dangerous part was not the unknown. It was the fact that she was starting to accept that she might not want to leave at all. Emily did not respond right away when he said it, because the words settled too deeply, too quickly, like something inside her had already understood before her mind could catch up, and she stood there in the rain, her arms still crossed, her breath slow but uneven, trying to process what it meant to be watched, what it meant for someone like him to decide what she would become, and that thought alone should have terrified her, should have made her step back, should have made her walk away, without looking back, but instead she stayed exactly where she was. And that was what unsettled her the most. Not him, not the strange world pressing in around her, but her own refusal to leave it behind, and she exhaled slowly, lifting her gaze to meet his again. That is not your decision to make, she said, and her voice was calm, steadier than she felt, because if she let herself fully understand the weight of his words, she might not be able to stand here at all, and something flickered in his expression, not anger, not surprise, but recognition, like he had expected her to say that, like he had been waiting to see if she would, and for a moment, the air between them shifted again, less tense, more focused, like something invisible had aligned, and he stepped closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough to make his presence impossible to ignore. It already is, he said quietly, and the certainty in his voice made her chest tighten again, because he was not threatening her. He was stating a fact, and that made it harder to argue against, harder to dismiss. And Emily shook her head slightly, more to ground herself than to deny him. You keep talking like everything is already decided, she said, but I did not choose any of this. And that was the truth, the one thing she could still hold on to, because whatever had started this, whatever had drawn her into his world, it had not been intentional. It had been a moment, a simple act, and now it had become something far bigger than she could have imagined. And he watched her carefully, his gaze steady, searching, like he was measuring something again, something beyond her words. And when he spoke, his voice was softer than before, but no less certain. You chose to stay, he said, and that simple sentence landed harder than anything else, because she could not deny it. Not anymore. Not after everything. Not after she had stood here instead of walking away. Not after she had asked questions instead of turning her back. And she looked away for a brief second, just enough to break the intensity of his gaze, her thoughts racing faster now, because he was right. And that realization shifted something inside her, something that made this feel less like something happening to her and more like something she was stepping into willingly, even if she did not fully understand why. And when she looked back at him, her voice was quieter, more honest. That does not mean I belong in your world, she said. And this time, he did not answer immediately, not because he could not, but because the question was not simple, and the silence stretched just long enough to make her wonder if he would leave it unanswered, if he would let her hold on to that last piece of distance between them. But then he stepped even closer, just enough that she could feel the cold of him again, that unnatural stillness that set him apart from everything else around them. And when he spoke, his voice was lower now, almost a whisper, but it carried more weight than anything else. You already crossed into it, he said, and Emily felt that again, that shift, deeper this time, like something inside her was being pulled forward whether she was ready or not, and she swallowed slowly, her pulse quickening despite her effort to stay calm, because there was something in the way he said it that made it feel final, not like a warning, but like a truth she could not undo. And she glanced past him again, half expecting those figures to return, half expecting the street to change in some visible way, but everything looked the same, the diner still lit, the rain still falling, the city still breathing somewhere beyond this moment, and yet nothing felt the same anymore. And that contrast made her chest tighten again, because it meant the change was not around her, it was inside it, woven into something she could not see but could feel with every breath. And she looked back at him one last time, her voice barely above the rain now. Then tell me how to leave, she said, because if there was still a way out, she needed to know. needed to hear it, needed to believe she still had that choice. And for the first time since she had met him, he did not answer, not immediately, not easily. And that hesitation said everything, because it meant the answer was not simple. It meant the answer might not even exist. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than ever, almost something he was not meant to say. "You cannot," he said, and the words settled into the space between them, heavy and unchangeable. And Emily realized then that this was no longer a question of whether her life had changed. It was a question of how far it would go. And as the rain continued to fall around them, steady and endless, she understood something else, something even more dangerous. She was no longer sure she wanted to turn back at all. Emily felt the weight of his answer settle into her bones, not as fear this time, but as something heavier, something that did not rush or spike, but stayed, steady and undeniable, like gravity had shifted and she was already falling. And for a moment she said nothing, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to deny, and the silence between them stretched, filled only by the sound of rain and the quiet rhythm of a world that no longer felt like hers. And she looked at him again, really looked, at the stillness in his posture, at the way he did not shiver, did not blink like a normal person would, at the way the night seemed to hold him differently, like he belonged to it. And her voice came out softer than before, not because she was weak, but because something inside her had shifted. "Then why are you telling me all this?" she asked. Because if she could not leave, if this was already decided in ways she could not control, then there had to be a reason he was standing here explaining it instead of simply disappearing and letting whatever came next happen without her understanding. And his gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. But there was something else there now, something deeper, something that had not been there when she first approached him. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter, more deliberate, like every word carried weight he did not take lightly. "Because you deserve to know what is coming," he said, and that answer made her chest tighten in a way she could not ignore, because it was not cold, it was not distant, it was something almost protective, and that should not have made sense, not after everything she had seen, not after everything he had said. And she shook her head slightly, trying to keep her thoughts clear. "And what is coming?" she asked, because that was the part he had not explained, the part that lingered just beyond reach. The part that made everything feel unfinished, and he did not answer right away, and that hesitation felt different this time, heavier, like the truth was not something easily spoken, and Emily felt her pulse pick up again, not from panic, but from anticipation, because she knew whatever he said next would matter more than anything else so far. And when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost a warning. "They will test you," he said, and Emily frowned. The words unfamiliar, unclear. "Test me how?" she asked, and he stepped closer again, just enough that the distance between them felt intentional, like he was choosing exactly how close to stand, exactly how much of himself to reveal, and his eyes held hers with a sharp intensity that made it impossible to look away. "To see if you are a threat," he said, and Emily's breath caught slightly. Not because she felt dangerous, but because the idea of being seen that way, measured that way, by something she barely understood, made the situation feel even more real, and she let out a slow breath, trying to steady herself. "I am not a threat," she said, and her voice was firm, because she knew that much, knew who she was, knew what she believed in. And he watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable, before speaking again. "That does not matter," he said, and the simplicity of it made it worse, because it meant the truth was not enough. It meant perception, power, and whatever rules governed his world mattered more than reality. And Emily felt that settle in her chest, heavy and unyielding. And she looked away briefly, her thoughts racing again, because this was bigger than she had thought, bigger than just him, bigger than just this moment. And when she looked back at him, there was something new in her expression, something steadier, something more resolved. "And what happens if I fail?" she asked, because she needed to know, needed to understand what she was facing. And this time, he did not hesitate, but his answer was quieter, more measured, like he was choosing not just what to say, but how much of it to give her. "Then I intervene," he said, and Emily blinked, the answer not what she expected, not as clear or as distant as she had prepared for, and something in her chest shifted again, something small but undeniable, because that was not indifference, that was not distance, that was something else entirely, and she studied him for a long moment, the rain still falling around them, the night still pressing close, and for the first time, she saw it clearly, not just the power, not just the danger, but the choice he was making, standing here, telling her this, involving himself in something he had already said was not supposed to happen, and her voice softened, almost without her realizing it. "Why would you do that?" she asked, and this time, when he looked at her, there was no hesitation, no distance, no barrier at all, just something raw and certain that made the world feel quieter for a single, suspended second. "Because you matter now," he said, and the words landed deeper than anything else, not loud, not forceful, but absolute, and Emily felt it, that shift, that pull, that undeniable sense that whatever this was, whatever she had stepped into, it was no longer just about survival or fear or escape. It was about something else entirely, something that had already begun to take shape between them, something she did not fully understand but could no longer ignore. And as the rain continued to fall, steady and unchanging, Emily Carter realized that the most dangerous part of all of this was not the world he came from. It was the fact that she was starting to become part of it. Emily did not realize when the rain stopped mattering completely, when the cold soaked into her clothes but never reached her, because something else had taken over, something quieter and far more consuming, and she stood there looking at him after those words. "Because you matter now" was not something she could dismiss, not something she could pretend she did not hear, and her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear, nothing to do with danger, but everything to do with the fact that he meant it. And she could feel that truth in the way he looked at her, steady and unwavering. Like this was not a passing moment, not a temporary decision, but something that had already taken root, and she swallowed slowly, trying to hold on to something logical, something grounded. "You do not even know what I am capable of," she said, because if they were going to test her, if his world was going to judge her, then that mattered, that should matter, and he did not hesitate this time, not even for a second. "I know enough," he said again, and this time it landed differently, not like a vague answer, but like a quiet certainty, and Emily felt her breath catch slightly, because she did not understand how that could be true, not when she barely understood herself in this moment. Not when everything around her felt like it was shifting faster than she could keep up, and she shook her head, a small movement, but enough to ground her thoughts again. "You are risking something," she said, because she remembered what he had said earlier, about rules, about things he was not supposed to break, and she looked at him carefully now, not just as the man who stood in front of her, but as something more, something connected to a world she could not see but could feel pressing in from all sides. "You said there are rules," she continued, her voice steady but softer now, "and you broke them." And for the first time, he did not answer immediately, and that silence felt different, heavier, like the weight of something far beyond this street, beyond this city, beyond anything she had ever known. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried that same quiet authority, but there was something else there now, something closer to truth than control. "There are consequences," he said, and the words settled into her slowly, not sharp, not sudden, but inevitable, like something already in motion, and Emily felt that again, that shift inside her, because this was not just about her anymore, not just about what she had stepped into, it was about what he had chosen to do, and she looked at him more closely now, searching for something, anything that would tell her how much this really mattered, and she saw it then, not in his posture, not in his voice, but in the smallest change in his expression, something restrained, something controlled, but undeniably real, and her voice softened without her meaning it to. "What kind of consequences?" she asked, because she needed to understand the cost, needed to know what this moment was building toward, and he held her gaze, steady, unflinching, but this time there was no distance left at all, no attempt to shield her from the truth. "They will come to me," he said, and Emily's breath caught slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what that meant, because it was not about her being taken or judged alone. It was about him being questioned, challenged, measured by whatever power existed in his world. And that realization shifted everything again, because it meant he was not untouchable, not completely, not when it came to this. And she felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest, something protective, something that did not belong in a moment like this, and she shook her head slightly, almost to push it away. Then stop, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Because if this was dangerous, if this was going to bring consequences down on him, then it did not make sense. None of it did. And for a moment, he just looked at her, and there was something in his expression she had not seen before, something almost like surprise, but softer, quieter, like he had not expected that response from her. And then it faded, replaced by something more certain, more grounded. And when he spoke, his voice was lower now, not louder, not stronger, but deeper, like it came from somewhere far beyond this moment. I already chose not to, he said, and Emily felt that again. That pull, that undeniable sense that this was no longer something that could be undone, not for him, not for her, and the air around them seemed to shift again, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. Like the night itself was tightening, like something unseen was drawing closer, and she felt it before she understood it. That quiet pressure returning, stronger this time, more focused, and her gaze flickered briefly past him, scanning the empty street that no longer felt empty at all. And when she looked back at him, her voice was barely above a whisper. They are already watching, are not they? She said. And this time, he did not deny it, did not soften it, did not give her distance from the truth. He simply held her gaze and said, yes. And that single word carried everything, the danger, the inevitability, the shift that had already begun. And Emily Carter realized then that whatever came next was not something she could prepare for, not something she could control, but something she would have to face, because whether she wanted to or not, she had already become part of a world that was no longer willing to let her go. Emily felt it before she saw anything. Before the air changed or the silence deepened, she felt it in the way her heartbeat slowed. Instead of racing, like something inside her had already accepted what was coming, and she stood there beside him, no longer questioning whether she should leave, because that question had already answered itself, and her eyes lifted slowly to meet his again, steady now, no hesitation left. Then let them watch, she said, and the words surprised even her, not because they were bold, but because they were true, and something in his expression shifted at that, not dramatically, not openly, but enough for her to see that he had not expected that response, not fully, and for a brief moment, the tension in the air changed, less like something closing in, more like something aligning, and he studied her carefully, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time, not just the girl who had offered him food, not just the human who had stepped into his world, but something more, something that could stand in it without breaking. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter now, not distant, not guarded, but almost certain. You do not understand what that means, he said, and Emily shook her head slightly, a small, honest movement. No, she admitted, but I understand enough, and that was the truth. She did not know his world, did not know its rules or its dangers or the weight of what was coming, but she understood this moment. She understood him, and she understood that walking away now would not make any of it disappear. And for the first time since this began, the fear that had followed her through every second of this night felt different, not gone, not erased, but quieter, steadier, like something she could carry instead of something that controlled her. And the silence between them stretched again, but it was no longer empty. It was full of something unspoken, something building, something inevitable. And then it happened, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, the shift in the air, the faint change in the way the night felt, like the world had tilted just slightly, and Emily's gaze flickered past him again, her senses sharper now, more aware, and she saw it this time, not clearly, not directly, but enough, shadows where there should not be shadows, movement where nothing should move, and her breath caught just slightly, not in panic, but in recognition. Because now she knew what she was feeling. They were there, watching, waiting, and when she looked back at him, her voice was calm, almost steady. They are here, she said, and he did not turn, did not react outwardly. But something in his posture changed, something subtle but unmistakable, like a king acknowledging a presence without needing to face it. And when he spoke, his voice carried that same quiet authority she had heard before, the one that made others step back without question. I know, he said, And Emily felt that again. That strange sense of being in the middle of something far bigger than herself, something that had already begun long before she stepped into it, and would continue long after this moment ended. And she took a slow breath, grounding herself, because if this was the moment they were waiting for, if this was the beginning of whatever came next, she was not going to look away, not now. And she lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance, not in challenge, but in quiet acceptance. And for a brief second, the world felt perfectly still, like everything was holding its breath, waiting. And then his voice broke the silence again, lower this time, meant only for her. "Stay close to me," he said. And the words were simple, but the meaning behind them was anything but, and Emily did not hesitate, not even for a second, because something inside her had already decided, already stepped forward, already crossed whatever line had been there before, and she moved just slightly closer, close enough to feel the cold of him again, that impossible, unnatural cold that no longer felt entirely foreign. And as she did, the night shifted once more noticeably this time, like something unseen had finally stepped into place. And Emily Carter realized that this was no longer the beginning. It was the point of no return, because whatever was watching them now was not just observing, it was deciding. And for the first time since this all began, she understood something with absolute clarity. She had not just fallen into his world, she had been chosen by it. And somewhere in the darkness beyond what she could see, something ancient and unseen had already begun to answer back.